Hello and welcome back to another late night talk. My returning guest this evening is Jeremy Szal. Hi, Jeremy. How are you doing?
Hello, Stephen. Very good, thank you. How about you?
Excellent, excellent. So Jeremy's returned to the fold because his second book, Blindspace, has come out. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. There is as excellently modeled by him. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but also the fact that writing a second book can be an enormous challenge, and it could be a real uphill struggle, and it's a bit of a mountain, because there's the whole thing of writing a book, getting an agent, and then hopefully getting a publishing deal, and then you finally get a publishing deal, and he starts working on that, and then whilst you're doing that, do us another one, but the same, but better, but the same, but different. And that so we'll talk a bit about the challenge of the return. But before that, how's it been with Stormblood? What's been the reception like from fans on your first book, your debut?
Yeah, I mean, I really had no expectations whatsoever. I mean, I've never really had, this is my debut. I mean, I've had short fiction published here and there, but short fiction is incredibly sporadic, and it's like micro flashes in the pan rather than anything long and sustaining and well received by a wider audience, and novels have a wider audience. It's just a fact. And so I really had no expectations going in. And I've been really, really pleasantly surprised by the response. I mean, it's a bit hard to talk about this without tooting my own horn, but I've had people tell me that it's their favorite science fiction series ever. It's their favorite books, which I'm modern sci-fi series, which I'm completely surprised by, because I don't even think it's the best modern sci-fi series out there. And I wrote the damn things. Yeah, like they've said that, it's the favorite books I've read in years. They've literally wanting to get tattoos of some of the characters' quotes on there. I've got people telling me that they've literally want to get mugs designed with, silhouettes from characters that they've messaged me saying oh, please, can we have more of this character? And I need this character in my life. Or even saying, that they found a friend in these characters, or they found it incredibly moving. And this one guy especially wrote into me and said that he was formerly a drug addict, and that he had to basically rely on found families as opposed to his blood relatives, because they'd all treated him badly. But his friends, they were the people he considered true family, his real family. And they gave him an authenticity to a relationship that he didn't have with his blood relatives. And that's the core themes of this book. And to have someone say that, I mean, it's impossible not to find that moving. It really is. And yeah, it's been incredibly pleasantly surprised, and which only, way doubles down on the pressure for the future books. But yeah, but that's just part of the bargain. But it is really good. I mean, it's a hard thing to complain about, really, because that's the reception that you want ultimately.
Yeah. And it took a long time to get, my first book published, and I know it took you a while as well. So was it worth it when you finally got out there and it's out on the shelves and you walk into a bookshop and there it is, right next to all these other names that you've seen for decades?
Yeah, I know, it's there in the wild. It's a great feeling. It really is. I mean, I was expecting it to be awesome, but I wasn't expecting to just have a whirlwind of emotion of it. It's because if you think about it, it's on the shelf, and if it gets sold or remains there, your words, your dreams, your personality, your heart, you, in a sense, your story, it's on the shelf permanently forever, in bookstores all around the world, in people's homes, on their devices, on their phones, and in their memories, as it were. And so it's impossible not to get swept up in that. I mean, I still walk past when I go to the city, there's bookstores, and sometimes it just hits me, my words are in there, along with every single other writer that's written words, and my story stands among them. It's quite overwhelming and very humbling in a lot of ways. And with my name alphabetically, I'm appearing next to Neil Stevenson, John Scalzi, Sanderson, Adrian Tchaikovsky, Tolkien, and Tade Thompson, which are pretty damn good names to be appearing next to. Yeah. And Richard Swan, actually, because Richard Swan actually pointed out that, I know you're watching this, Richard, that our names are right next to each other alphabetically, SW and SZ. So we're always going to be side by side.
Nice.
For better or worse, whether we want to or not. But yeah, it's very, very cool. It's especially as the American release is by the time we're recording is coming out next month or in March 2022, and so I'll have that same feeling, I guess, in for the whole year of North America, which will be another thing in of itself. Yeah.
Yes, well, this is it. And obviously you were able to pass on your words of wisdom to young Richard on his debut recently at an outing I saw.
I'm not sure there was I'm not sure there was much wisdom involved. There was a lot of beer. But no, yeah, it was really cool, especially as, you know, with COVID, not many chances to meet up, and you know, especially with people in the science fiction fantasy genre industry, especially someone who lives locally down in here in Sydney, Australia. But he just happened to be migrating from Britain to Australia. I mean, I assume that they just sent him to as a new prison warden to oversee the colony. You know, that, you know, because that's what this country is anyway. It's just a massive prison colony for the colonial Brits.
According to Ellison.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And so I just assumed they sent him here for that reason, but he decided to go native and drink. So there you have it.
I had an interesting question, actually. Someone sent one in on the Discord, and they were sort of saying, because they live in a country that's not UK or America, and they're asking about agents and stuff, that there just aren't any or very many in their country. So when you were looking, obviously we should say your agent is John Jarrell, yes? Mm-hmm. So are there many literary agents in Australia, and did you have to go and look at like the UK and America to find someone? Was that, you know, you just had to do it?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I've talked about with a lot of people, and I think there's a little bit of a misconception with writers who live down here, is that in order to be published as an Australian, you have to be like go to local agents, you have to go to local people in this industry, and they'll hook you up, because the international waters are just not available. And we do have a lot of Aussie writers who do go to small presses here and do go to local agents and do go to people in the local pond, as it were, to be a big fish in a small pond. And if they want to do that, that's absolutely fine. But the problem I have is that misconception has then transplanted to the fact that, no, if you're Australian, this is what you have to do. Well, no, you don't. Like, it's emails exist, the internet exists. You can just email off an agent or you know, an editor, publisher, or whatever, anywhere in the world. I mean, honestly, if you're wanting to get published in the UK, then that's what you have to do. I mean, I'm sure there are some Australian agents who can manage that on a international scale, but from what I've seen, in order to get published internationally, you probably do need to go through an international agency or agent. Yeah, I mean, obviously, as I said, there are some people who want to remain local, and that's fine. But I think that, like, if you spend more than 2 seconds on the internet, basically going to proper resources, people who actually know what they're talking about, yeah, like it's there's only one really way to do it, and that's just to go to international editors and agents if you want to get published internationally.
Yeah, because some of the people were saying there isn't anybody by them, and I said, well, you know, I've got friends who live in the UK and they're agents in America, and some in America and agents in the UK. You're obviously in Australia, and, you know, John's in the UK. It doesn't really matter like it may have in the past. It's not the same now. Like, some people have never met their agent. I mean, have you ever met John?
Yeah, multiple times,
okay.
But I got him before I'd ever met him. Like, I got my editor Gillian before I met him, and that's the other thing. Before I ever got signed on with her, I got signed with Gollancz, and that's another thing. I think another misconception, that in order to actually get anywhere, you have to meet people in person. And sure, it obviously is a contributing factor, but it's not the defining factor. And, you know, it's not like countries or where you are geographically should not be a hindrance to getting an agent. I mean, you know, and that kind of ties into your previous question a little bit, that I think there's a lot of Australian writers who either very small local writers, and again, that's fine, that's all I want to do. And then you have the big guys, you know, Jay Kristoff, Garth Nix, folks like that, who Sean Williams, who are big on the international scene, but a lot of them don't recognize them as Australian writers. I mean, I've spoken to like a dozen people using this exact example, and their response is, Jay Kristoff is Australian? And I'm like, yes, my point in case. And so, yeah, I mean, they're obviously, you know, they've got agents in the US and publishers in the US and all around the world, and they're not stationed there. So yeah, case in point.
Yeah, it's just there's so many misconceptions that I'm constantly trying to bat off and explain to people, and you know, reality versus what fiction or what some people on the internet continue to spread. So here's a question. So once you had an agent and then you were published, or you were even in the process of working on that first book with Gollancz, was there anything that surprised you? Because I know you've done work with, you know, Starship Sofa and a lot of other editors and writers, but was there anything that caught you by surprise that you didn't know?
About the editorial process?
Or just suddenly working, you know, with a big publisher and being part of, you know, your debut novel going to come out?
Yeah, how much of a big deal it is. I mean, it's obviously a big deal to us because it's our book, but we think, you know, how many books are published, it's not really they've got so many other, you know, things on the plate, but like there's so much to do. There's covers, there's marketing, there's typesetting, there's printing, and then there's editorial. I mean, every sentence of my book we went through it with a red pen. I mean, that's what editors do. And but then Gillian helped me with structural edits, and she helped me made change, or not, I don't want to say changes, because that implies that she's like said, no, do or die, you change this, or I'm tearing the contract in front of you. And that's another misconception. But the way she phrases it is that it's suggestions, you know, let's have a conversation about it, let's talk. I would suggest that we change it this way in order to distill your narrative, so what you're trying to do becomes more enhanced. It becomes more powerful. It becomes a more powerful version of your story, not some other story.
Yes.
And so I hadn't really thought about edits that way. I'd more thought about it, okay, how do I take what's already there and just refine it, polish it, you know, really sharpen it. But instead I was now thinking, oh, okay, now it's just about really overhauling, like ripping its guts out and reinstalling something else. And I haven't really thought about narrative that way before editing, and it was quite a pleasant eye-opener, and it really helped me dig deeper into my stories and have more tighter control over them, because I think, and I'm no exception to this, that there's some people who will finish a first draft of a story and then edit, you know, a few things here and there, run it through a spell checker, and that it's done. And in my early days, I was very, very much guilty of that. And but this helped me go to the other extreme. And it's not always fun, especially when you realize you made a mistake. But it is quite satisfying, though, to realize, yes, this is what the story needs. This is what I want, and this is how we do it. And so no, I was quite pleasantly surprised to find just how much room there was for improvement. Yeah.
I was surprised, the same, at how collaborative it is, because when you write that first draft of the book, it's just you and the page, and then once it goes into the kind of the publisher, there's a lot of hands and there's a lot of people working on it. And yeah, that was surprising to me, I guess, despite knowing that an editor would work on it. And, you know, it's like, oh, but there's also a copy editor, and then there's a proofreader, and, you know, you have to talk to marketing about things and PR, and, you know, how do you want to pitch this book? Well, how do you see it? What about the cover? What are your thoughts? And it's all a lot of work. That's just stuff you don't necessarily think about unless you're self-publishing and you're used to doing, you know, all that kind of business side.
Because ultimately it's your perception of your product, and it's also someone else's perception. And then there's a perception from a marketing point of view. And so this is one of the key items we discussed was, do we want to pitch this as a sci-fi, military sci-fi, or a space opera? Is it a noirish detective first person a la Altered Carbon, or is it grander, more expansive like Mass Effect or The Expanse? And we had a lot of conversations about it, but the reason why we had an evolution in cover style, like as you can see, the first one's very noirish and moody and Gotham in space, and the second is full, diving down into a gothic planetary city from space, and there's spaceships and stars and solar flares and that sort of thing. And that was very much deliberate because that's the way the narrative was going. But that's not the way I didn't necessarily think about it that way. It was just, once you actually sit down and have those conversations, yes, okay, now I see why we need to have this talk, and let's see what we can do.
There's always that weird disconnect because you spend so close to the page and you're working on it so much that you think your book inside and out. We've had this conversation on Twitter that you're the ultimate authority on your book because you created it, but how other people peer through a window at it and perceive it, and then sometimes you think, oh, that isn't what I was going for, so you have to make adjustments. And that's another thing that was surprising to me, because people say, well, I'm not getting it from that, and you're thinking, okay, so why aren't they getting it from that? Right, I need to move this around or change this or enhance this, so the next time they read it they go, oh yeah, now I see what you were saying.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Yeah,
it's a bit tricky. Yeah, definitely evolution of work and progress of work as you get more into it. So you've done Stormblood, it's all out, it's done, and then they're like, okay, do it again, please.
Yeah, but better.
But better,
multiple times,
different,
multiple times,
but the same, but better, but different. So where did you start?
Well, I didn't actually know what I was doing. And
Okay.
about a third of the way through, or I'd never written a sequel before. This is my first time working under contract or anything like that. And a third of the way through, it kind of hit me that every decision I made, every arc, every narrative choice would basically build a cage for I was building a cage for myself. This is the way the narrative is going. This is the way, like, if you make this character do one thing, these are the consequences of that thing. These are his alterations in personality. That's going to send you on another path. And you cannot take those 10 other paths. And that, when I came to that realization, it almost made me feel trapped by Vakov's character, like, the amount of decisions he could take, the routes he could go. And but eventually, so I've spoken about this before, but yeah, book 2 was the subject of many edits, and I basically gutted and rewrote 2/3 of it because it just wasn't right. But it was the right thing for me to do. I mean, the skeleton was there, but it just needed some readjustments to really make it the book that it needed to be. But it was quite an arduous process, but it was also very eye-opening to see, as I said earlier, that you can really make those adjustments. I mean, once you've typed something up on the page, like, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, there's nothing that can't be rewritten or gutted or changed or adjusted or altered once you can see the shape of the whole thing in front of you. And it was quite a good thing, I think, for me to go through that process, because it also showed me that just how much stuff it can be altered and your entire vision can change as well. And I think that's ultimately the most important thing, to make sure your story is as much as the story it needs to be, as much as possible. It's the best version of itself. But yeah, book 2 was difficult. It was very, very difficult. I'll say that much.
So you've started working on this second book. You get maybe, a third or more in, and then you realize it's not kind of working, or you need to talk to someone about it. Who did you thrash out the rest of the ideas and the story with?
So yeah, this is actually a pretty unusual process, as my agent has told me many times. So basically, I got about 4/5 of the way through it, and I'd been editing it back and forth, and I had the ending in mind. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I just didn't know how to juggle all the narrative arcs and plot threads and world building set pieces in order to get there and to make that ending stick. I mean, I know exactly where the story is going. I just want to make sure that the bits in between are actually fun and interesting, and that I've owned this. Like, okay, like, I'm this moment that we've had here, like, I really earned it. I really made this stick. Like, I haven't just said in the last 2 pages, oh, I changed. Well, no, we've actually seen the steps taken to get to this point, and it reads a lot more authentically. And so I got to this point, and I, just was it was almost word vomit. I was just like, right, one half of this one scene, this one thing I wanted to do, no, that's not working. Okay, I'll go to the next scene. And I skipped ahead. I just got so frustrated. I'm like, threw in the towel, like, stuff it. I'm just going to skip to what I know I can write. So I skipped to that point and wrote the ending, and it was all fine. And now I had a big, big mess of text in front of me. And I'm like, well, damn, what do I do now? And so I was fiddling around with it, trying to make it work. And eventually I just got frustrated. And I said to Jillian, look, would you just be able to just take a look at it and just, if it's terrible, tell me, I'll rewrite it. But I just need to know what is and isn't working and what you think. And she, the editing warrior legend that she is, said, yes, I'll do that. And she went through it, read the whole thing. And she's like, this is actually really good. Like, it needs, you know, some to be fixed here and there, but it's what you have here is actually really good. And keep in mind, some of the scenes were literally like, have argument, have really traumatic scene, X character gets brutally maimed in such fashion, lots of weird alien stuff and more alien stuff and maybe Krakens. Like, that was literally like in between. And she was like, oh, that's really good. You really keep in mind what you're trying to keep him. I'm like, you don't have to sugarcoat it, Jillian. Come on, big boy, I think. But yeah, that was the process. But what doing that really, when she was able to go back and look through the better scenes that I'd written and see what I was trying to do and what I was trying to achieve, and perhaps what I was not probably quite reaching for, or what I hadn't quite reached, but she could see where I was going. And so it kind of when she made a few suggestions, it kind of distilled the whole process for me. Okay, this stuff that I actually was doing, I need to actually really double down on this, or I need to go into another direction. And because I was trying to keep it under 180K, ironically, I'd actually cut back a lot of the things she told me to add back in. So for example, I cut out a lot of the, you know, briefing and planning scenes. The character's like, okay, we're going to go here, do this way and achieve this, you know, setting out the goalposts. And I skipped out on that and just distilled it into a few paragraphs in the paragraph in the character's narration. She's like, no, we actually need to have these conversations. We need to see what's happening, what we're trying to achieve, because it will really flesh it out in the reader's mind. And so if things inevitably do go pear-shaped, it actually, we feel the weight of that punch, right, because we already set the stage for it. I mean, it's like the best battle scenes or the best, you know, siege scenes or duel scenes, and this is just speaking generally, are the ones that are set up. Like, you know, the Battle of the Bastards in Game of Thrones, Gladiator, any siege scene in any piece of fiction, it's because, you know, you see the gradual build up, you see the tension, the stakes, the fleshing out, the characters. You actually get to feel the momentum building up, the dread escalating. If you just cut to the actual battle scene, then you haven't really set much up in the first place. And so it kind of really just, you know, distilled for me, okay, I'm going to have these big events and I'm going to build the narrative around them. I'm going to take my time to show the build up, the consequences, the stakes, all of it. And instead of just trying to write 6 of them and fit them all in, I'm going to take the best ones and expand on them. And so there's a few set pieces in this book, especially the first, there's one in there set on another moon. It's like a little bit of a heist mission. And then there's one set on alien ruins. And I think they're the best things I've ever written because it combines all of the big moments that I'm trying to achieve. So character arcs, emotion, plot, you know, moves the plot along. It has a really good setting. The world building really works really well. And I'm not just saying that because, you know, I'm a genius of writing. I'm saying that because I was able to go back and layer it in. Okay, on this one draft, it's going to be the story. On the second, it's going to be the character. On the third, I'm going to really polish the setting and the world building. On the fourth, I'm going to really make the language stick. I'm going to really make the prose nice and sharp. You know, being able to go back in and fine tune each individual layer, it all meshes really nicely together instead of just, you know, trying to all do it in one go and hoping for the best, because it's not going to be especially at least with what I'm writing, it's not going to be good on the first pass. I'll get the skeleton down and then I'll get the meat on it.
Yeah. I think a lot of new writers struggle to get that first draft done because they're always think there's this perception that's not accurate, where they think that the first draft has to be perfect, whatever that means. And, it's never going to be perfect. And despite telling all of them, and so many of them, how much work goes into editing the book afterwards, some people just never finish that first draft ever. And I'm always constantly telling people, just finish the draft, because once you've written it, once you've done, you can look back and you'll see what you're actually trying to achieve and how close or far you got from it. And then you can start the work of kind of polishing it, rearranging things, moving things, fleshing it out. Like you said, okay, now I'll do the dialogue, now I'll do the world building, now I'll do, but it takes input from other people, I think, to be able to see it clearly sometimes, because you're just too close to it. You spent so long with it. There's a disconnect, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can see, you see it so close up, you can't see the tree from the forest.
Yeah.
You need to be able to take a step back, and then you realize, oh, okay, now it's kind of pointless polishing this every single paragraph, because this entire scene needs to be gutted. Or, I can't really get this character's motivation, this, tiny heroic speech, right? Because this character, he doesn't need to be here, or he needs to die a few chapters earlier, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's not sometimes until you see the shape of the whole thing in front of you that you can actually make those judgment calls. Everyone's brain is wired differently. And so how you actually go about getting to that point, as you say, is will vary between people. But I do ultimately think that the best thing you can do is be able to finish a first draft and then have the ability, the stamina and the guts to go back and tear it apart if you need to. And that's the hardest thing. There is some sort of temptation, even with us, to just finish a first draft or however many drafts, and it's at its baseline good. Okay, now it's done. Now here comes the easy part. We can just start the polishing. And I actually have to fight the instinct to do that. I have to say, no, I have to look at this as fluid. It's not a solid. It is everything's interchangeable. The scene is not concrete. It is wet clay, and I can shape it to whatever I want, or I can tear it out completely. And it's interesting, because now that that's all said and done, it's, in my case, my book is concrete. It's stone now. It's not changeable. I can't actually see in every case where those threads are. Like, I can't actually go and see, okay, this was tacked on, this was added, this dialogue, it wasn't written in one sitting perfectly as it was. In some instances I can, but for the most part, I can't really, if I try really hard, I can't really see where I made each of those layer adjustments. And I honestly, once that's all said and done, I doubt many people can either, because you're seeing the tree from the forest.
Yeah, you can't see the joins of where you've been kind of repiecing things back together, because it's gone through so many hands, but also it's gone through so many drafts that it just becomes one kind of, mass. And that's the other problem I think some new writers have. They fiddle with stuff indefinitely because they're trying to get it right. And I'm like, it's going to change anyway. Eventually it'll go out, and you might come back to your book years later and find some mistakes. It's like, it's done. It's too late. You can't go back and revise it even then. And in 10 years time, you might look back and go, oh, I probably would do this a bit different now. But there again, that just comes with experience. You write the best book that you can in the moment, and then you move on. Yeah. You have to learn from it and go on to the next one.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
But that's true of me with book 2. Even that's true of me of book 1. It's certainly true of me of book 1. But even with book 2, I'm like, you know what, I could have maybe done this differently. But at the time when I hit send on the final version, that was, every word was perfect. It was as best as I could make it. And then you have to live with that. You have to get it to that stage where you are at the time.
Yeah, this is it. So did you have a word cap kind of max that you were sort of told you shouldn't really go over when you were working on book 2?
It was suggested by my agent that I talk with Gillian, and she was to keep everything on the level. I said, you know, probably 180K, 180, 85. And she was like, yeah, we can do that. And I do remember sitting with her in Dublin Worldcon, and she said, if you hit that and you keep going, we may have a little chat. But I said to her eventually, when I was doing this, before I sent out this new version, after, okay, so she'd looked at it, seen what I needed to do, the big picture stuff. So we're not talking about edits that are, you know, fixing this one scene here or readjusting it there. Like, this is the big narrative arcs for each character, the plot threads. Where are we going? What's the end result going to be? And how are we going to get there? The big stomping steps. And I said to her, look, in order to do these partially things that I wanted to do and the things that you've suggested, I basically, like, we had a Zoom chat, and I basically said to her, like, do I have your leave to basically write these scenes, as many of them as they need to be, as long as they need to be? And she said, yes, then we'll go and take a look at it. And I said to her, I promise it won't be 350K. And she said, no worries. I've seen them before. And I'm like, oh dear God. Okay, I'm not going to do a Sanderson. Don't you worry, at least. And so, yeah, I mean, even with this past book 3, she's even saying to me, just write as many scenes as you need to and write them as long as you can. Then we'll just go back and look at it. But so I breezed past that 180K and just watched it go, saying hello, see you later. And I hit a 230K.
Wow.
On book 2. Yeah, look, I justify this by saying that in order for me to sometimes get to the meat of the scene, I had to just dig through the muck first. I had to be able to, like, find out what the scene is or what I'm trying to do. I had to just do a word vomit, basically, just get it all out there. Because if it's not there, I'm always going to doubt whether or not it did need to be there. And in doing that word vomit, I discovered some new things about the story and the characters that I never would have otherwise. And so I'm really glad I took that risk. Yeah, I mean, not in any big state, but just like within a scene, or this character revelation, or this one character relationship dynamic that I'd not really explored before, and I wouldn't have had the guts to explore if I didn't have that room to stretch my legs. And so it did, you know, kind of teach me, this is a little bit of a tangent, but it did kind of teach me, you know, that although I do try to outline my books by and large, like tight, kind of loosely, but also tightly, always have room to be creative in the moment. You know, I can't just write a bullet point outline of my book and then just sit there and turn it into words, because that's boring as hell.
Yeah.
I just want to be able to have some leg room to stretch, you know, so if my characters need to go off on a side mission to do something crazy and bizarre, I can. And one of those things actually ended up in book 2. And it's one of my favorite scenes, because they go to these alien drug dealers to basically find a lead. And the aliens, the ship is a giant bone. The aliens are basically dogs. They're dogs, but they've got wings, but they look like dogs. The ship's a bone, and it's called the Joint.
Okay.
I couldn't resist. I really couldn't. Yeah, and so yeah, I'm like, you know, why not? And so, like, I didn't think I'd get away with it, but I did. And you know, and the main characters are constantly referring to is like, you know, okay, we've got them collared now time for the leash. Okay, now if this guy and his pack of sons of bitches is gonna fall for our lead, or he's gonna sniff us out, we'll put him back in the kennel. And all this other stuff. Like, it's slightly more serious than that. They are, you know, cannibal drug dealers. But yeah, like, it's that sort of stuff. Like, I don't think I would have sat down and thought about that in my outline. But when I was in the moment, wrapped up in the ambient, the nuance of it, I sure as hell wanted to write it, and so I did. But yeah, getting back to your question, I just submitted it to Gillian at 230K. And she cut it down to 160K and did not touch the story.
Wow, that is some good cutting there.
It's a good cutting, and it really helped me see the tree from the forest. Like, okay, I don't need to go back and trim every paragraph and not every sentence, because not every single one of them was. But what are the crucial things that you can't live without, or what are the things that you don't want to have here? I mean, you don't need to spend a whole paragraph describing what the side character looks like, but you should spend a paragraph talking about what the main characters look like. Not all of them are equal. And you do need to know, make those judgment calls. And what do you actually describe? What do you include? What are those things that you can cut? What are those things you can skip? Do you need to go from A to B to C to D? Or can you just jump from A to D and just describe A and B and C and in a quick hindsight? And yeah, I mean, I did know that originally, but it really kind of solidified that for me when I saw it in practice. And yeah, and so I ultimately added back about 20,000 words, and we played with it back and forth, and it landed at 188K, possibly 189, because I had to do a last minute change on proofs. But yeah, so that's what I did. And ironically, it's still 180K in that bracket after all that stress and trouble. So yeah,
that's good.
I managed it in the end.
You've hit your target. You said get 280K, have a conversation. Yeah, but you've got it back down. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I find that too in the editing process. I kind of cut a load of stuff out sometimes myself, and then you end up layering other things back in. And so the word count can vary, but not, I've never had that big a jump though, from like 230 down to 160 and then back up to 180.
I may have overindulged in some places, but no, but it was pretty necessary at the time. I mean, like, some people are kind of shocked when I say this, but I would much rather write a book that's 1,000 pages long and then cut it back to 500 and then add 200 more than kill myself trying to make that perfect target on the first draft. Because out of those extra 500 pages I write, even if half of them, or even if a fifth of them are great, then I would have missed out on everything that I would have missed out on them if I'd taken the other route. I mean, I know one writer, Josiah Barncroft, with his last books of Babel, he wrote, I think he had to cut 200 pages at one point. But he said he didn't mind, because in that creation of those 200 pages, he came across some of the best quotes in the book series that he's written, or that yeah. And so that's just the process. And that's my process. I mean, unfortunately for my editor, that's my process.
Well, yeah, you're not alone. There are other writers who prefer to kind of overwrite on that first draft rather than go the other way. So Pete McLean is the other way. He writes very kind of very, his books are quite lean anyway, but he writes quite tight. And his editor's like, can you put more in?
Yeah. The thing is interesting about those books is, because I listened to them in audio, that I'm not really sure what else I would put in, because there's very, very sparse description. There's not much about the city or getting from A to B. It just gets straight to the meat, and that's all you get is meat. But that's just the nature of his storytelling. I mean, I'm writing space opera. Yeah. I'm writing with an ensemble. I can't not describe all these other things. I can't not work in setting details. I mean, look at Gareth Hanrahan's the Black Iron God series. I mean, they've got a huge amount of setting-based description that some other fantasy writer like McLean might just cut completely, but his story demands it. And so that's just the way you need to go. And honestly, I don't think I'd know any editor or any professional in the industry who wouldn't take that philosophy. You know, the story is as long as it needs to be. Tell the story the way it needs to be told, and then we'll just take a look at it afterwards. Yeah, I mean, like, as going back to what we were saying at the start of this conversation, you have so many misconceptions about word count and the way what editors will take. And if it's one syllable over 120K, then God help you, you'll be banned from the industry like Zeus with a lightning bolt. Like, it's nonsense. Yeah. You know, there's so many different ways to get there, and so many different writers and types of editors who work with them. What's your method of editing? Do you, or drafting, or should I say, do you write long and cut, or do you write short and add?
I'm probably similar to you in that I write a bit long. I don't go. I always have a rough idea in my head, but I also plan like you. I have bullet points, but I have loads of wiggle room in between. I don't know how I get from A to B. I just know something happens. And so when I sit down, there's that creative spark, that creative element in the scene when I'm writing it. Sometimes I write something and I go, what's that? I don't know. Let's find out. And then you go forward. But sometimes I've had that where, so in my first book, there was like a subplot about a serial killer. And they said, my editor came back to me and said, this is interesting, but it doesn't fit with the rest of the book. The clarity of the scenes, it kind of distracts. So while I enjoyed reading about it, it doesn't really work with the rest and gel. I'm like, okay, so the character is still there, but it's kind of peeled back, so that element isn't in there. But I think I tend to cut only about maybe 20 or 30K at most, but then I end up adding another 10 back in. So the variance is only out by about 10 or 20K most times, 30 at most. But all my books are fairly lean. They're all, I don't think I've done a book over 150K yet.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, because I think that most writers do tend to be in the 150 to 200K zone with epic fantasy and epic science fiction, especially. And I think that's a zone I'm pretty comfortable in. I don't think I'd ever want to overstep that.
Yeah.
I mean, once you go over 200K, you're going into some serious long zones. And yeah, I think that I do like that, you know, little medium between overly long and not overly long, but very long and very lean.
Yeah. I think the Coward's about 118, 120 maybe at most. Wow. Something like that. So it's like 430 pages or something. So it's something like that. It's definitely well under 150. I know that, and the sequel's about the same. So, but
tell me your secret, Stephen. Tell me your secret.
Well, this is
how do I write shorter books?
I was thinking about mine. I think about Pete McLean's book, and his book is first person, and mine usually have like mine are always third person with more than one point of view. But I'm thinking I wouldn't say that mine's particularly tight the same way that his books are. We just have a different style. So I don't know. I world building and descriptions and stuff in mine because it's in fantasy worlds. It's not Earth. I don't know. This is it. It's like people saying, what's the winning combination? What's the silver bullet to get published? I'm constantly telling them there isn't. You've got to find whatever your voice is, whatever your distinct way of doing things is, that's not the same as everybody else. And that will only stand you in good stead when you try to, stand out in a very crowded market. This is the problem.
Yeah. I mean, it's impossible to say this without bragging, but I'm doing first person character driven space opera that's obviously very voice driven, but also quite setting established, and it's very gothic-y and in its world building, but also has aliens with personality and humor, but also has terrible things happening in the background. And obviously we've got Red Rising and we've got The Expanse and a few other things, but I think that there aren't too many people doing that. I mean, like, there could very well be that I'm just completely ignorant of them, but I think a lot of science fiction, modern science fiction, is quite idea driven, and it's very classical in the sense, I mean, you pick up the average fantasy book and it's going to be a given. There's going to be great characters, there's going to be great dialogue, there's going to have very Abercrombie-esque dynamics and battle scenes and scenes of heroism and scenes of all, it all balances out, and you've got quite an established story. But a lot of science fiction, and I think, is very it's very ideas driven and it's a little bit dry. But because I came reading a lot of fantasy and I just transplanted that aesthetic, that philosophy to writing character and storytelling to science fiction. And obviously I could have done all those things, but it's the voice that counts ultimately. That really, it's the make or break, and I'm just talking about this in relation to what you're saying about standing out with a very, very crowded market. And that's probably why I got the book deal in the first place, was probably the voice. And I would say that's true for most people, including Peter McLean's storytelling. I mean, he's basically writing Peaky Blinders Birmingham in fantasy land, and I don't think he'd disagree, but it's the voice of Thomas Piety that is it has an iron grip on you the moment you start reading, and it's indefinable.
Yeah. And another great one with great voice is Christopher Buehlman's Black Tongue Thief with the main,
Yes.
it's first person with Kinch. And there again, either you like the character and his voice or you don't. But if you love it, you can go so many places. And I love that. That was my favorite fantasy book that I read last year.
It's great.
Just
Yeah,
so good.
Great.
The world was so different. So there again, it's unique. It's a different voice. It's a different world. It's something we haven't seen in a long time in fantasy, the way that he's done it. So it just stood out to me and was like, yeah, this is it. I'm in. It's brilliant. So come back to your work. You're now working on book 3, yes?
Yes, book 3 is it's in the works. I am currently, I don't know how many words because I'm using Scrivener this time and not Word document. So it's just so I can mentally organize it, everything, and write each scene individually, for trying to focus on each step of the narrative instead of just seeing the whole thing as I'm writing it. But so I've got no idea about the word count. I expect it will be long. I expect it is long and will be longer still by the time I'm done with it. Sorry, Julian. But I'm, unlike book 2, have a pretty much dead set guarantee that what I've written now, the story so far in this draft, it is a reflection of not only the finished product, but my vision for the overall storyline. Like, this is the way I want the characters and the story and the way that they sit and interact with the world, the things they do. This is the way the story is going to play out, because I'm constantly thinking not just about what happens, but what actions do the characters take? How do they drive the story? How do they define these big moments? They're not just sitting in the background being tugged along by some other system. No, they're saying, no, I'm going to determine how things are going to go. I'm going to do something that changes the way the battlefield is going, or the way the political dynamics are going, or the way the bad guys see us. And so that means doing things where a lot of people die brutally, among other things, of course. There are other things on that. But it's just a matter of going back and really nailing them down to make them effective as possible. I shouldn't count my chickens before they hatch, because I'm only halfway through, or a little bit over half, probably. And there's quite a bit more of the story to go. And I don't know each step of that way yet. I mean, I wish I could ask future me what I do, but unfortunately he's not being very responsive right now, so I've got to make it up as I go along. But and that's the scary thing, isn't it? Like, the blank page, I could fill this with anything. I could take any step. I could just breeze past this, or I could describe everything in slow detail, or I could just skip over it. I could skip the scene entirely and write something new, or I could write a few little scenes like this in sequence where we're going back and forth talking to each character. Like, that's the scary thing, I think. But as I said earlier, it's important to take a step back, see the tree from the forest, and let the story develop organically.
So it's a trilogy, correct?
Yes.
Are you already you've got a bunch of other things that you want to do, that you want to get to, and next ideas? Are they stacking up and you scribble them down somewhere?
I haven't written anything down. I have a vague idea of what I may be doing. I'm trying not to think about it, because I'm going to be really, really sad when I've got to leave these characters behind and this world. I mean, I've not really spoken to anyone about whether we do another trilogy in this world, or a new book, or another trilogy as you did. But I think I would probably want to work on something new, at least for time being, because I just need some new horizons. I need to see some new colors, wear a new skin, do a new voice. I don't ever see myself stepping away from first person voice driven stuff.
Interesting.
I don't see myself stepping away from the genre. So, high octane, gonzo, gothic-y space opera, but also very gritty and urban, and not perhaps urban, but very, in your face and close, and you get to smell the streets and feel the grit in the spaceship, that sort of thing, like The Mandalorian or something, or The Expanse, something like that. I don't really see, but still with an epic backdrop. I don't actually know what I'm going to do next in terms of stories, but I do have a few vague ideas bouncing around. I just need to haven't really thought about them, because book 3 is just sucking up all the creative oxygen in my brain at the moment. So best to focus on it. So so hopefully I actually have a career after it's published. So but I'm sure you'll buy it, Stephen.
I'm sure I will. Yes. But so you're cracking away in book 3, and that'll be out next year, 2023.
August 2023 as
Right.
of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Well, Stormblood and Blindspace are out now in all good
They are.
bookshops. I will put links down below as usual for all of Jeremy's social media and stuff where you can find out about him and all of his books. But thank you for joining me again and coming on and talking about book 2, because that is a thing that a lot of people are like, oh God, what do I do now? I've got to do it again.
Yeah.
The struggle is
What
real.
are words? What are words? How do I do good words do? What? Yeah.
What does it mean? How does it work? Anyway, brilliant. Thanks, Jeremy. We'll see you guys later.
Very much, Stephen.
Good
See
night,
you around.
everyone.